Wie zich ooit heeft afgevraagd hoe Oliver Hardy die vermaarde, nukkige blik in de camera produceerde, krijgt over 22 minuten antwoord. Het is een van de dingen die aan bod komen in Stan Laurel The Last Laugh. Dit programma is samengesteld uit een aantal zeldzame elementen, waaronder opname van de stem van Arthur Stanley Jefferson, zoals hij in werkelijkheid heette. Opnieuw een eerbetoon bij de VPRO aan een van de groten uit de filmcomedie, de dunne helft van Laurel en Hardy.
...16 juni 1990. De internationale Laurel en Hardy fanclub Sons of the Desert komt in het Engelse plaatsje Ulverston bijeen om de 100ste verjaardag te vieren van Arthur Stanley Jefferson, beter bekend als Stan Laurel. De club, genoemd naar een film van Laurel en Hardy uit 1933, telt leden van allerlei pluimage, van fanatieke fans tot serieuze filmhistorici. Dit enthousiasme voor een stel komieken dat al 50 jaar geen film meer heeft gemaakt, is een eerbetoon aan de schrijf- en acteerprestaties van Stan Laurel.
Lancashire, and my family were a theatrical family. My dad wrote shows and produced shows and also had a circuit of theaters around the north of England. I didn't have much education. It was my own fault. I had every chance, but I don't know, the spirit of the theater was in me and it was more glamour.
Stans idool was George Robey, destijds dé grote ster van het variététheater. Robey heeft niet alleen Stan Laurel beïnvloed, maar ook Charlie Chaplin.
I wasn't too successful, however, because I'd had no experience and didn't have any material of any kind. In fact, I hadn't found myself anyway. I didn't know just what kind of a comic I was or anything else, but I was just happy to be in front of the footlights. So I finally drifted into the Fred Carno company. That was Carno's London Comedians. And with the same outfit was Charlie Chaplin. And after about a year, we were booked to come over to America.
Als invaller van Chaplin ging Stan in 1912 mee op het Amerikaanse tournee. Voor de Engelse Carno's Comedians was de aantrekkingskracht van het enorme Amerikaanse variétécircuit onweerstaanbaar.
We were supposed to rehearse the show coming over on the boat. Well, we had terrible storms. We took 12 days crossing and everybody was ill. So no rehearsals were ever gotten to, you know, one of those things. So consequently, it was just a big mix-up when we got out there.
The first night in New York, opening night, and he put his shoes out to be shined, European style. Well, in New York City, they stole the shoes. So he had to go on the next night with a white tie and tails and carpet slippers. And it got such a big laugh when he came out there with carpet slippers. He said from that time on, he always went out with carpet slippers, even though he bought a new pair of shoes.
Well, we didn't do the show that we came over with. We picked the one that we were familiar with. That was the night in an English musical, Mummingbirds, as we call it in England. And the show is a terrific hit.
Well, certainly Carno has a lot to do with the shaping of American film comedy because Carno was a very important influence in the careers of Charles Chaplin and Stan Laurel. Carno had a peculiar style of comedy which was a combination of knockabout and slapstick and pathos.
In Amerika werd Charlie Chaplin al gauw erkend als groot talent. En nog voor Kerstmis kreeg hij van filmproducent Mack Sennett een contract aangeboden. In Hollywood verliet Chaplin zich vaak op zijn oude collega's uit het variété-theater. Hal Roach herinnert het zich nog goed.
I went to work for SNA making pictures with the English comedians that Chaplin had under salary. And I was introduced to him, and he told me that I had to go on location just before noon. And I said, well, why? That's odd. Why do I have to do that? He says, because I tell you you have to. And I said, that is certainly enough reason for me to do it. Then I found out if he went on location, the company had to pay for lunch for the whole bunch on location. So all these guys, these Englishmen who working for me, they wanted to eat for free too. So I did what he said. We'd go out and make one scene and go to the cafeteria. And these English comics would fill a tray so full of food they could hardly carry it. I'm sure they didn't have to eat any dinner when they got through with the luncheon that the studio paid for.
Stan Jefferson hoorde niet tot de vroegere collega's die Chaplin onder zijn vleugels nam. Toen er een eind kwam aan het succes van Carno's Comedians, moest Stan zijn eigen weg vinden in het variété-theater. Chaplin wenste hem in een vriendelijk briefje een rooskleurige toekomst toe, maar daar bleef het ook bij.
Chaplin zoomed very quickly to the heights of the profession. Stan remained in vaudeville for 6 or 8 years after that before trying on various occasions to work here in pictures. It wasn't that he expected help, but it would have been welcomed at that time.
Ironisch genoeg berustte Stans succes in het variété-theater op zijn treffende imitatie van Charlie Chaplin. Terwijl Chaplin het hoogtepunt van zijn carrière naderde, reisde Stan Jefferson het variété-circuit van Amerika af. Onderweg verwierf hij niet alleen een hele reeks medespelers, maar ook een nieuwe toneelnaam, Laurel. In 1917 arriveerde Stan Laurel in Los Angeles, toen al de hoofdstad van de filmindustrie.
When I first made a picture for Bronco Billy Anderson, he asked me if I'd ever been in pictures, or had any idea, and I said no. He said, well, he says, how would you like to make some comedies for me? Well, he had a director with him at that time called Jess Robbins. So Anderson called him up and said, I got a new comic, I want you to make this pilot picture with him. So he brought his cameraman over to direct this picture with me, and also brought Hardy. That Hardy, Babe as we call him later, he just played a heavy part. It was mostly for chase. So that's the first time that I met Babe, but only for 2 or 3 days. And then I didn't see him for probably 2 or 3 years after.
Stan was weer terug in het variété-theater, maar niet voor lang. Want er werd opnieuw ontdekt, en ditmaal door filmproducent Hal Roach.
I went to this vaudeville house on Main Street to see he and his wife in a show, and I thought he was very funny, and I made a contract with him there. That was the first time that I ever saw him.
I made about 24 pictures for Hal Roach, and then I left and went with Joe Rock to Universal.
I think Stan was always frustrated as a solo comedian because I think he was searching for a comic identity, and I don't think he ever really found it. He was always a good technical comedian. He had a wonderfully elastic body and could do wonderful reactions, had a very expressive face and a very expressive body. But as far as knowing who he was as a comic personality, I don't think he ever found that as a solo performer.
Tussen 1917 en 1926 maakte Stan meer dan 70 korte comedies. Maar door zijn veranderlijke filmpersoonlijkheid bleef zijn populariteit beperkt. Het meeste succes had hij met parodieën op filmdrama's, waarin hij bepaalde personages kon persifleren. Maar een echte ster werd hij niet.
I wasn't too successful as a comic. They told me my eyes were too blue to photograph. There was a kind excuse, you know, one of those things. And I didn't feel I was so hot myself, so I was very happy to get into some other end of the business.
In 1926 kwam Stan terug bij de Roach Studios, maar nu als schrijver en bedenker van komische effecten. Op zijn 36e besloot hij zijn acteercarrière op te geven.
The Hal Roach Studio, I think, was a creative oasis for people who wanted to make good comedy films. I've interviewed 60 people who worked there, and all of them speak of the place as being absolutely unlike any other studio.
See, the stationery said the Hal Roach Studio, and right below it said the lot of fun. And that's exactly what it was. Everybody was very high-keyed up and bouncing, you know. And I attribute it mostly to Stan.
The one thing that he did when he made pictures was great. You write a script for, you know, certain things are funny. You get on the stage and you rehearse a thing and it isn't funny. The best thing that Laurel could do in the pictures, there was always something that he could remember to change it into a thing that would be funny. As a gag man, he was as great as Chaplin, because Chaplin was using the same things in the same way that he was using them.
Oliver Hardy at that time, the late part of 1925 and early part of 1926, Oliver Hardy was a contract player at the Hal Roach Studios. He did a number of different roles. Sometimes he would be the villain, sometimes he would be a supporting comic. And there were a few films which Stan directed which featured Hardy in the cast. You would think that they would have done more films together than the 3 or 4 that they actually did collaborate on, but somehow they had a remarkable way of avoiding each other while they were both under contract at the Roach Studios.
Oliver Hardy, ofwel Babe, had al in meer dan 250 stomme films gespeeld.
Oliver Hardy was as good an actor as there was in the business. And I say everything that he did, I mean, his character, he built that character himself. Nobody else built it, he built it. And no director had to tell him what to do. By the time they were ready to shoot the thing, he knew exactly how to do it himself and did it.
As Oliver Norval Hardy tells it, a leg of lamb brought them together.
I don't know if you recognize that voice, Mr. Laurel or Mr. Hardy. You should. At the time, he was production supervisor at the Hal Roach Studios, and later he worked on your pictures, now known the world over as the famous writer-director of Going My Way, Bells of St. Mary's, My Son John, many, many more great hits, your good friend, director Leo McCarey. Look, Leo, how did a leg of lamb... sit down, Oliver, and we're going to get that a boy. How did a leg of lamb bring Laurel and Hardy together, eh?
Well, it seems that Babe was cooking a leg of lamb, and for some reason, he left his arm in the oven too long or something. And he got it so badly blistered that we had to cut down his part in the next picture, so we decided to put Stan in the picture, too, to bolster up the comedy. And So when we saw the two of them on the screen together, we decided there's a real team. And from that time on, they really went places, all on account of Hardy had a little lamb.
I think Stan was a little reluctant because, after all, he had been through all that before. He had been a performer. He had had a share of success, but never had really been big time. And I'm not so sure that he wanted to get back into performing on a regular basis after finding that he really enjoyed being behind the scenes even more. So it may have taken some persuading, but of course, as we all know, eventually they were teamed together and things gradually grew.
Vanaf de eerste keer dat ze in 1927 als duo optraden, waren Laurel en Hardy een groot succes. Ze kwamen iedere maand met een nieuwe komedie van 20 minuten en ontwikkelden al gauw een eigen stijl met personages die met zo'n gemak tot stand kwamen dat ze eerder ontdekt schenen te zijn dan bedacht. Laurels bijdrage als schrijver was hierbij even cruciaal als zijn bijdrage als acteur. In het schrijversteam was zijn inbreng het grootst. Laurel en Hardy maakte pas laat carrière. Ironisch genoeg gebeurde dat op het moment van de traumatische overgang van de stomme naar de sprekende film.
I made a deal with the Victor Company to do the sound at my studio, and I'm going to direct the first picture. And the studio's all excited about the thing. So noon the next day, the projection room was absolutely full of people to see the first talking in there. So the thing goes on and gets to the end of the scene, and somebody says, "That's good." I'm a little annoyed. I'm directing the picture, I'd written the picture, and I decide what's good or bad. And the next scene went on, and it said, same voice, "That's good." I'm a little madder. The third scene comes on, the voice on the same, and I'm stop the projection room. I directed this picture. I run this studio. I'm going to decide whether the thing is good or bad. Now, who the hell is it in this outfit that is saying that's good after the finish of every one of my scenes? And there was a silence for a few seconds, and then the girl that does the thing, and he says, "I'm sorry, Mr. Roach, but that's you."
Thank you, boys. Where'll you be when I need you?
Right here.
Okay.
I told you not to make that last payment.
When Hollywood was going through the great changeover into sound, I think there were some rare cases where the personality came out stronger than it had been before. I think Ronald Colman was such a case, and I think Laurel and Hardy were such a case. I think in all cases it had to do with the voice, the quality of the voice, and how well that voice fit the preconceived idea of the character.
How does it look? Never looked better in all its life.
Well, bring it over because I'm as hungry as a hunter.
Where's the rest of it? It's shriveled. Well, I'm glad you didn't bring a sardine.
This is a Laurel and Hardy script for a film they made in 1932 called Scram. And the film runs 20 minutes, but this script is only about 6 pages. And as you might be able to see, it's simply an outline of the action for the film. It's not really detailed as to all of the comedy material, and certainly there's no suggestion of camera angles or editing or anything like that. It's just a mere outline of the action that's supposed to go on in the film. And occasionally you can see here 2 or 3 lines of dialogue, but that's it. Generally the dialogue was improvised on the set.
The night before he'd shoot something, some of the writers, Charlie Rogers and Harry Langdon and people like that, would come over and they would laugh, and I can remember a lot of laughter coming from the den. I can also remember, the den smelled so bad when they'd leave because some of them were cigar smokers, and I was always glad to see them go out the front door.
Babe never participated. Babe was always out on the golf course, over Riviera. He'd be a good golfer. And he would always come in around 9 or 10 o'clock driving in from the golf course. But Stan always stayed on.
Their personalities were completely different. And it was sort of the attraction of opposites in that regard. Because Oliver, Babe, brilliant as he was in the day's work in the shooting, at the end of it, that was the end until tomorrow. Not so with Stan. There was still cutting to be done, and timing, and testing those scenes in front of an audience at some little neighborhood theater somewhere where they could sneak the pictures. But Babe left all that to Stan, quite rightfully so. I mean, they didn't need 2 geniuses at work on these pictures.
De vroege jaren 30 waren een gouden tijd voor Laurel en Hardy. En door de geboorte van zijn dochter Lois was Stan ook in zijn privéleven erg gelukkig.
He thought the world of Babe and thought he was really a funny, funny man. When he'd watch the films, he wouldn't be watching himself. He was always watching Babe. And Babe knew that my father would make the best decision. Like if he wrote something, maybe they'd try it 3 ways, but my father would have the say-so of which way they did it to go, because he knew what worked. It was the love and respect that they had for one another. They were one of a kind team. They just belonged.
Stan knew that at the end of the afternoon, Oliver wanted to get home and get to his club and play golf and have a card game and so forth. So he would wait sometimes for the late afternoon in order to shoot the close-up of Babe that was needed for a scene. And he would get that sort of petulant look in the eye because of his irritation of being kept there so long.
Will you stop making that noise? If you can't play a tune, put it down.
Their timing was so beautiful. You know, you see other comedians trying to do situation comedy like they did, and they don't have that timing like Stan and Babe had. They knew those looks, and when they dropped the head and look up with the eyes, all of those things, they were so beautifully timed, and they were human beings. You know, they weren't comics. I don't like that word. They were comedians.
where they were so good was you do a gag that's funny, and now you cut to one of them and the reaction is another laugh, then you cut to the other guy and that was still another laugh. I mean, Laurel with the surprise of the thing, and Hardy with the indignity of it. I mean, the reaction to the thing was good. And the audience knew that they were so closely knit together that they were going to stick together regardless of what happened.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Oliver Hardy speaking. I'm taking this opportunity of thanking you and the countless friends in the British Isles for the wonderfully wholehearted reception you have given me on my first visit to your beautiful country.
Ollie, stop wiggling your tie.
What do you mean, stop wiggling my tie?
Well, every time you get fancy, you start wiggling your tie, and it looks silly.
If you interrupt me again, I'll wiggle you.
They had been working in a little bit of a cocoon at the Hal Roach Studios. They certainly were aware that they were popular because, after all, they kept being prevailed upon to make more films, so they knew somebody liked them. But they weren't aware of the incredible hold they had on the affections of the public. And they came face to face with that for the first time in the summer of 1932 when they visited England. They had some very frightening experiences with the crowds. At one point, their car was besieged by mobs, and the mob tore off a door of their car. Babe was almost trampled by one of the crowds. So there were some very, very frightening moments because of the adulation of all these people. And no one was more surprised by all of this than Laurel and Hardy.
Terug in Hollywood komt er onvermijdelijk een keerpunt in hun carrière.
The two-reelers were very successful, but Laurel and Hardy had to make feature films out of necessity. Hal Roach did not want to make feature films. The Hal Roach Studios specialized in short comedy. Hal Roach would have been very happy to continue making two-reel, one-reel short comedies.
They went into feature production because the double feature in the United States made it impossible for the theaters to use a half-hour comedy. And all they could use was features. And where I made the mistake of my life, I should have made about 40-minute comedies. And I could have sold them as a second feature. But I wasn't smart enough to do that. So I went into making feature pictures with them.
The result of that was that there were some more constraints on their ability to improvise. After all, the feature films were much more expensive than the shorts. The shorts generally cost about $15,000 to $20,000 to make. The feature films could run as high as $600,000. And when you were making only 1 or 2 feature films a year, as opposed to 8 short subjects a year, you had to be a little more concerned about the quality of the film because it was going to be a lot longer before you had another one in the theaters. So since there was more money being spent, Roach had to watch over the features a little more carefully.
It lacked very much because Hal Roach and I, we differed a great deal on story ideas and gags and what have you. And we didn't get along too well on that picture. We disagreed very much.
It wasn't a question of liking him or not. Like, what the hell was he going to do if he didn't? We couldn't make two-reelers because we couldn't sell them. So, I mean, it wasn't, I didn't want to make features. Nobody wanted to make those kind of features. But we there to make features and do nothing.
In the feature films, rather than having one story, as you would have with the short subjects, you have a musical number, a bit with the romantic leads, and then Laurel and Hardy doing a routine for 5 minutes, and then the cycle repeats itself. And as a result, I think that audiences today are a little bit less satisfied with the feature films than they are with the short subjects, because the short subjects are pure Laurel and Hardy, and in many of the feature films, it tends to be a little bit diluted by the addition of the other elements.
Now, when I fill this with wine, I'll hand it to you. Then you pour it in there. Do you mean to tell me that 500,000 francs is concealed in that little bit of silken lace?
Uh-huh.
I'm sure that Stan knew, as Roach did, you just couldn't sustain pure Laurel and Hardy comedy for an hour and a half. The material wasn't there. I mean, unless you were Chaplin and you had the luxury of working for 2 or 3 years to make a picture.
Certainly, Roach was a good judge of story material in thinking that something like The Bohemian Girl or Fra Diavolo would be a wonderful vehicle for Laurel and Hardy. Those are 2 excellent films, and even though they have storylines that involve other people and they have lots of musical numbers, they hold up. They are wonderful films.
Let me look at you. You're spiffed.
Where the whole thing fell apart was when I bought this musical in New York, and I got on the train to write the story of the musical. And when I got into the studio, I was so pleased with everything of buying it and having the script. I called all the writers in, and Stan and Babe were not working, and they weren't at the studio. So, I mean, the writers all knew what was the next picture going to be, but they also knew that Stan Laurel couldn't have had any part in it. So he was so mad that he said he couldn't do it because they couldn't wear the derbies for no reason at all. And finally got to the point where I had bought it. I said, all right, you make it. And I had nothing to do with it at all, and he made a lousy picture.
I think that was the first time that I felt my father had really attained stardom, because he was in such a big picture. Usually there was just Babe and Stan and a few people, but to walk onto a set and see hundreds and hundreds of people was really something.
Maybe it is the film in which Roach felt that it was no longer one big happy family where they were all on the same wavelength. And who's to say who would have been right in that matter? Babes in Toyland is a wonderful film as is, and of course the storyline they ended up with was one that Stan worked on.
What do you think of that? Pipple. That's the silliest thing I have ever seen. Try it. I don't want to try it. Why, can't you do it? Well, certainly I can. What do you mean, can I do it? Give me that stick. Get over there. It's a certainty that anything you can do, I can do. What, for instance? here.
Laurel and Hardy had a contract problem with Hal Roach in 1938. They were always under separate contracts. They were never under contract as the team Laurel and Hardy, which worked to Hal Roach's advantage because when he had one under contract, he could get the other for a lower price than he might otherwise get. And finally, in 1938, the boys decided to put up a united front, and Stan elected to wait out for about 1.5 years and wait until Hardy's contract was finished.
Both the guys were getting old. I mean, they were, but in, you know, they were getting to the point where they got wrinkles and gray hair and so on. And it was going to be, no matter what happened, they were only going to be good for a short time longer.
In 1939, Hardy's contract with Roach finally expired, and after a period of negotiations, Laurel and Hardy eventually signed 2 more separate contracts, but at least at this time, they both ran for the exact same period. They didn't terminate at different times of the year. So it was the next best thing to having a contract as a team. The same day that Laurel and Hardy signed their new contracts with Hal Roach, they were loaned out to an independent producer by the name of Boris Morris, where they made a film called The Flying Deuces. It's really the only film that Laurel and Hardy made away from Hal Roach that approaches the quality of the Hal Roach films, and that's because, to a large degree, Stan Laurel was involved in the writing of the film.
There's a nice pickle we're in. Shot at sunrise.
I hope it's cloudy tomorrow. Say, Ollie.
What?
Do you still want to come back as a horse?
I don't care if I never come back.
They knew it had come to an end. They had done their best. They really had. And it was changing. And the studios were changing. What I mean is, you know, it wasn't like the good old days where you just run and say, "Hi, fellas, come on," or "Let's go to lunch now," and it might be 10:30 in the morning, or it might be 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But everything was on schedule after that. And I think that it was never the same old fun thing that they had had.
When Laurel and Hardy went to 20th Century Fox and MGM in 1941, they came up against the motion picture studio factories at the peak of their powers. Hal Roach only made 7 or 8 feature films a year at the peak of his production, whereas Fox and MGM made 52 features a year. And there was a very strict schedule that had to be adhered to. And because of that, everything had to be written down in the script. And because of that, there wasn't the spontaneity that you had had in the Hal Roach films.
They didn't buy Stan and his stories. They supplied their own writers. Well, that was dynamite. That just cutting Stan's throat, you know. So he lost his vigor and his enthusiasm, I felt, and interest in the figures they were producing.
I think they were in their kind of a down period. There was no joking, and don't forget, too, they were older. From Hal Roach. This was like 40, 43. And they were quite sedate and quiet, because I don't think they felt, you know, that they were the big stars at the studio.
Hey, you mugs. Gentlemen. Well, well, it's Laurel and Hardy, as if I didn't know. Hello, boys, this is Pete Smith, as if you didn't know. Say, I'd like your help here for a minute. Do you mind? No, of course not. I just want you lads to show the audience how much wood the average person totes. Wood, got any?
It's heresy to say, but it's also true, that there was a time with the advent of World War II when the style of comedy that Laurel and Hardy were offering was regarded as somehow passé. Now, in retrospect, we look at whatever momentarily eclipsed Laurel and Hardy during that period, and we can't imagine why anyone would prefer Abbott and Costello or whoever else was popular for those few years, why anyone would prefer them to Laurel and Hardy.
You find just as much interest today in the old-time slapstick material?
I think that there is more interest, but there's so little of it done.
That's true.
I think that people want to laugh now, but they don't have the things to laugh at.
Very, very true.
And people nowadays, they want to be connected with the higher type of, we might say, drama.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be associated with comedy.
Yet they like to see it.
It's because the comedy is difficult to make, you see.
There weren't any further offers, at least at that time. So Stan wrote a 20 or 25-minute sketch, comedy sketch, and their manager in London, Bernard Delfont, I believe he's Lord Delfont today, booked them. And in theaters all over the British Isles.
Het was een dubieuze troost voor Stan Laurel dat de cirkel van zijn carrière nu rond was. Vanaf zijn eerste stap als jonge komiek bij Fred Karno tot de tournees die hij met Oliver Hardy aan het einde van hun carrière maakte, stelde Stan Laurel het optreden voor een zaal met publiek altijd zeer op prijs. Het succes van de laatste tournees leverde een tastbaar bewijs van de liefde die het publiek voor ze koesterde. Ondanks de voldoening die de Europese tournees hen gaven, eiste het zware schema zijn tol. In 1954 kreeg Oliver Hardy de eerste van een reeks hartaanvallen. Stan Laurel werd getroffen door een lichte beroerte.
After Stan had a slight stroke and came home from the hospital, he was in a wheelchair for the first few weeks. And the Hardys, for some reason, hadn't been able to go to the hospital to see him, so they came to the house on Franklin Avenue. And, you know, that could be a very difficult moment. It certainly was. And the bell rang, and Mrs. Laurel went to the door, and there was Oliver and Lucille. And they came in, and they could see just over there Stan sitting in the wheelchair. And he looked toward them, but he didn't speak. And Hardy, it was just absolutely brilliant. He stood there, he looked at Stan, and he said, "Well, here's another nice mess you've gotten into." And he walked over to him and kissed him on the forehead.
Stan Laurel herstelde langzaam, maar Oliver Hardy ging zienderogen achteruit. Uiteindelijk kreeg hij een aanval waarvan hij niet meer herstelde en hij stierf op 7 augustus 1957.
One thing with my Uncle Babe, I think, comes to my mind more vividly than anything else. when I would visit the set, and there was always a red light over the door when they were shooting, and I'd have to wait until the red light went off, and then I'd enter the stage. And when he would see me, he would start singing Shine on Harvest Moon, and he usually put me up on his knee. And that's a real fond memory of Uncle Babe.
Shine on, harvest moon, up in the sky. I ain't had no loving since January, April, June or July. Snow time, tain't no time to stay outdoors and spoon. Shine on, harvest moon for me and my girl.
Stan kept his name in the Santa Monica telephone directory so that fans could readily find him. And they did. And very often at that door there would be a family of 3 or 4 from Nebraska or Minnesota or somewhere. Great fans who wanted to meet Stan. They would be invited in, and they would ask usually the same questions: how he and Hardy met, and how long they'd known each other, and how many pictures. The questions were quite predictable.
Between 55 and 65, they were, you know, among the hottest shows on television, and I didn't get one penny from it. Sad, sad. He wouldn't. When I used to talk to him, he was living in an $80 a month apartment. It's a nice apartment, and it'd probably be a lot more today, but back in those days, it was only $80 a month, yeah. But he didn't mind. He laughed about it. He thought it was funny.
Na jarenlang door de filmindustrie te zijn genegeerd, werd Stans talent in 1961 eindelijk bekroond met een Oscar. Door Stan zelf Mr. Clean genoemd.
I don't think anybody is making that kind of comedy now. The one thing that I am certain about is the people's ability to laugh and wanting to laugh is not a bit different today than it was 100 years ago. And they laugh at the same things.
I'm sure he just, it would be hard for him to believe that they're really, in a way, more popular today than they were when they were making the films. Even those people who say were in my age and were in high school at the time, maybe they didn't think much about Laurel and Hardy. But today, they've changed their opinion, and their children and grandchildren are enjoying Laurel and Hardy.
I've seen the Laurel and Hardy films, almost all of them, dozens of times, so there are very few surprises in the films left for me. I know all of the gags, but I just love to be in the company of those two characters because I find them to be such genuinely nice, lovable people. I just like to spend a little time with them once in a while. And maybe that is why the Laurel and Hardy films continue to have such great popularity when other comedies of that era have been forgotten. They have that element of love in them, which I hope is something that people are going to react to for decades to come.
In closing, I want to say that all my years of experience being with Stan and Babe, I am definitely convinced that there will never be a day in the future that they will be duplicated, because there is not that talent anywhere. God bless them.